Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today we're going to be talking about bonus depreciation and specifically how doctors and high-income professionals use bonus depreciation to legally almost pay zero in taxes and sometimes zero itself. This is actually something that we've done over the years and multiple years been able to use 100% bonus depreciation to be able to pay zero in taxes. Now, one of the things we wanted to start out with is talking about the tax code, because a lot of people hearing this and hearing, oh my gosh, you guys paid zero in federal income taxes for multiple years, may wonder, is this even fair, right? And I think a lot of people in our community have the philosophy of, I want to pay what's fair and I want to pay my share of the taxes, whatever that is, I want to pay what's due. Then again, they also don't like the pain of paying really high taxes. So how do we think about the tax code and how do we reason through why it's set up the way it is to allow people who are investing in real estate to pay zero or even much less in taxes than people who are maybe W-2 earners who are making several $100,000 a year?
Yeah, and I think one way that a lot of people think about the tax code is that it's a series of incentives. And the government has written the code in a way to incentivize people to act in the way that they want us to. And by acting that way, what we're actually doing is we're being economic engines and we're actually generating more economic activity, which ultimately leads to higher tax revenue for the government. And so they are incentivizing you to do exactly what they want us to do for the purpose of actually increasing tax revenue in the future.
And this is why they incentivize business ownership, okay? And this is also why they incentivize real estate, which is a form of business ownership, but also even more so real estate has tax benefits. And that's partially, I think, because we're providing housing. And that's not something that the government wants to do, is to provide housing for everybody across the United States who doesn't, buy their own home, but rather decides to rent. And so we're doing this kind of two parts that the government doesn't want to do, and that's why it's incentivized to be able to help real estate investors do this and get interested in real estate investing and have more of us providing, ideally, great housing, right?
Now, I did want to mention something about, it's not just bonus depreciation, you also need some other way of capturing this benefit. And that's one way to do that is with real estate professional status. And I wanted to talk about that real briefly because it involves my dad. And my dad was a longtime real estate investor. I grew up with real estate investing. I remember we used to drive to rental properties and go pick up checks, right? Pick up the rent.
Which luckily we've never decided to do,
we've
right?
Never
but there
done.
are people in our community who have decided to do self-management and do want to do these types of things.
That's right. But back early when he was investing, they didn't have all these rules that they have today about what you need to do in order to qualify for this benefit. And since then, what they've done is they've created something called real estate professional status. And I think the easiest way to think about that is they want to make sure that this is not a loophole, right? That this is not some easy way for a high income earner to get these tax benefits. They want to make sure that you're serious, right? That you're actually going out and buying real estate and actually creating that economic activity, which is going to ultimately lead to higher tax revenue for the government. So they layered in this thing called real estate professional status. And once you have that, then you can use bonus depreciation to offset W-2 income if you're a physician, lawyer, high income earner.
Yeah, and we've done other podcasts where we talk about real estate professional status in depth. We've had podcasts where we talk about the short-term rental tax loophole, and we've talked about medical office buildings and how you can use those medical office buildings where your medical practice is located inside to be able to shelter medical practice income. So we're not going to go in depth in those three things and the requirements this time today. What we really wanted to talk about was this ability to use depreciation to be able to reduce your taxes or even eliminate your taxes. Now, before we go into depth here, we should also mention we're not CPAs, right? Kenji and I have been doing real estate investing now for combined 35 plus years, but you definitely want a great CPA on board and you want to be able to take what you learn here and go and talk about it and to see if it's applicable to you and if there are shifts you want to make in what you're doing, like maybe adding more properties to be able to take advantage of some of what we're talking about, but make sure your CPA is involved and really a strategist along the way.
So let's start out by talking about what is depreciation and why should you care?
So depreciation is basically that the government sees the value of your building as decreasing every single year. So when you buy a rental building, that building has a certain amount of value that's assigned to it. The land also has a certain amount of value. And the government says, as a real estate investor, you're allowed to write off a portion of the value of the building every single year off. And with residential properties, that's up to 27 and a half years. You can write the property value off to zero. With commercial properties, including short-term rentals, you do that over 39 years. And what that means is every single year you have a little bit of a loss you're able to write off of the property. Now, the property may be gaining in value. You may buy a property and it may be worth more the next year, and you could go sell it and you could make more. But in this case, the government still allows you to write it off as a loss, that piece of the property. Also important to note that in a lot of countries, this depreciation can happen maybe once on a property. In the US, it resets every time a new owner buys that property. So it doesn't matter if you're buying a property that's 100 years old and 5 people have owned it before you. When you buy that property at a certain price, now that depreciation is set and you get to write off that property each and every single year. And if you own it over 27 and a half years, for example, the value of the building of the property is going to go to zero.
Yeah, as an example, like if you have, let's say, $1 million building, right? I'm not talking about the land here, but let's just say the building value is $1 million. And let's say it's a residential property, so it depreciates over 27 and a half years. That's going to go to zero, assuming that you hold it for 27 and a half years. Now, if you sell that property after 27 and a half years, and let's say that you sell it and the building value at this point is $2 million, the next person who buys it gets to actually write off $2 million of that building over 27 and a half years, right? It resets. Whereas, as Leti said, in another country, once you sell it, after that 27 and a half years, there's no more depreciation left. Once it's to zero, the next person who buys it gets no depreciation. And so that's what's really unique about the US tax system, and I think one of the benefits of investing in real estate in the US.
So now you know what depreciation is, but you probably are wondering, like, why is this so important? Well, when you have a loss, that loss shelters income. Okay. And so if you were a passive investor in real estate, you own your own rental properties, but you're not getting real estate professional, you're not using the short-term rental tax loophole, you are being a quote unquote passive investor, then basically you get a passive loss with that piece of depreciation every year. And what that's going to do is that it's going to help shelter any gains that you have for that property. So let's say you make a 10,000 profit in the end of cash flow on that property, then that is a passive gain, and that passive loss that you have from that property and depreciation is going to help shelter part or maybe even all of that gain that you have on that property. Now, if you are an active investor in real estate, so you have short-term rental tax loophole or real estate professional, you meet criteria for those, what you're now able to take is that loss and make it an active loss. And it can shelter even active income like your W-2 income or your 1099 income, or if you're a business owner, it can shelter other business income. And so it's a little bit more valuable when it's that way. Actually, it's a lot more valuable, right? Because especially if you're a high income earning doctor who's paying a ton in taxes every year, the value of being able to lower your taxable income from, let's say you're making $300,000 a year, and even if you just create a loss of depreciation across all your buildings of $100,000 a year, you've lowered your taxes really significantly. It makes a huge difference.
Now, since this episode is for doctors and high-income earners, something I wanted to mention is that one way to really get these large depreciation losses is to keep scaling up into bigger and bigger properties. And so when we went from 3 smaller properties, a duplex single-family home, a really cheap sixplex, we took those properties, sold them, and put it into a 32-unit property. That 32-unit property that we bought for $3 million created an $850,000 loss. And so that kind of gives you a sense of like the numbers. That $850,000 loss can shelter $850,000 of income. If we don't use all that, we can actually carry forward for future years and then actually shelter future years' income. And so again, I just want to give you a sense of the numbers and how this scales up, especially for a high-income earner. You have, let's say, $500,000 to $1 million of income. You're like, how do I even shelter that? This is how you do it. You scale up.
Yeah, so we talked about depreciation being based on the purchase price of the property, right? And the value of the building of the property, not the land, the building. But what I also wanted to talk about was other ways of creating losses in your real estate portfolio, because we personally, as I mentioned, paid zero, but there's a lot of people who are doing that in our community. They're not only doing it by needing to buy properties every year and create depreciation that way. There are other ways that they're also creating depreciation. And one of the big ones is actually through rehabbing. So when you rehab a property, you have certain expenses that you're putting into that property. And there's actually two different ways you can create losses when you do that.
Yeah, so the first way is when you, let's say, do a renovation, let's say you're renovating a kitchen and you're going to completely gut it and you're going to replace it with new stuff. So let's say the countertop and the cabinets and the appliances, you just kind of get rid of everything. And when you get rid of everything, that's actually a tax write-off, right? It's called partial asset disposition. When you dispose of those things, you can actually get a write-off. If you've depreciated it before, then you can actually take the depreciation off your books. Now, that may not mean much to you right now, but if you don't understand what I'm talking about, this is something that you want to talk to your CPA about. You want to talk to them about partial asset disposition anytime you're doing a renovation and you're throwing away stuff. And then they can kind of walk you through the details. So that's one way. The second way you can get a tax benefit with a renovation is when you put in the new stuff, you can depreciate that, right? So if you put in new cabinets, then you can depreciate that over time. And now there's a way to front load that by using 100% bonus depreciation, which we should talk about as well.
Yeah, so it's important to clarify that right now there's 100% bonus depreciation. It came back about a year ago, and it doesn't have an expiration point at this point, which is really exciting because what it's allowing you to do is take basically the things that you would normally have depreciated over the first 20 years of your building. It's allowing you to take those in year one. And that's why Kenji was able to give you that example of a $3 million purchase that created an $850,000 roughly write-off in year one, is because of 100% bonus depreciation and being able to shift so much of that depreciation to the very first year you purchase it. And that's so valuable because when you're getting real estate professional status, or maybe you're doing the short-term rental tax loophole, this is a status you need to earn every year. You need to be able to meet requirements every year. And so when you're able to shift all those losses to the first year, first of all, it allows you to have a nice big loss, right? Which can make a huge difference in your taxable income that year. But also it allows you to say, hey, I'm going to get real estate professional status this year, or I'm going to be really active with this specific short-term rental. I'm going to do the 100 hours and more than anyone else this year. And next year I'm going to be passive. Or next year I'm going to go back to working full-time as a doctor and I'm not going to get real estate professional status. And what's so cool, you will have been able to harvest a ton of those tax savings up front and not have to feel like you have to be an active investor in that specific property that very next year. And so it makes it a little bit easier because you don't have that pressure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, at this point, maybe I thought it'd be helpful to kind of talk about how all these pieces fit together. And so, again, let's take that $3 million property. You get that bonus depreciation on that property first, right? So we talked about that being $850,000 that we were able to write off. That's that one piece. The second piece is any renovations that we did on that property. So we actually went in and renovated most of the units by this point. But when we do a renovation, again, we're going to get partial asset disposition, but also we can bonus depreciate the new stuff that we put in, right?
Yeah, so when you renovate, there's some parts of the renovation that are going to be expenses. Those are going to be completely written off right away. But there are going to be parts of the renovation that maybe normally would be depreciated over many, many years, maybe 15 years, let's say, for example. Well, you can use 100% bonus depreciation on those too, and you can front load your losses from that renovation. Again, the goal of a real estate investor is get as many losses as possible and shelter as much income as possible, because a dollar in your pocket today allows you to be reinvested, and with compounding, it's going to be worth a ton more in 5 or 10 years versus spreading out your losses a little bit every single year. And again, maybe they're not active losses one year because you don't have real estate professional status, you don't meet the criteria, and now you have a passive loss, which just isn't as useful. And so you really want to kind of front load things and take advantage of them now. Get an extra dollar in your pocket, reinvest that extra dollar, and build your wealth and get there faster.
Yeah, and so just in that example, again, just to kind of look at the numbers, $850,000 from bonus depreciation. Let's say that we did a $250,000 rehab. We can potentially write off most, if not all of that rehab, 250,000. So that's added on to that 850,000. And then you might have some items, that you threw away that you're going to write off. Maybe that's another 25 to 50,000. So when you add all that up, we're talking well over $1 million of write-offs that you can use to offset your income, assuming that you have real estate professional status or the short-term rental tax loophole.
And that's why this is so exciting, right? This is so exciting because as a physician or a high income earner, you're paying so much in taxes. You are in the highest bracket in terms of the percentage of taxes you're paying for the income you're bringing in. Those people who are, making millions and millions a year and are business owners, they're paying less in percentage of taxes than you are as a high income earning W-2. And so that's why real estate's so attractive to so many of us, because it can be done on the side without you needing to quit your W-2. A lot of businesses are much heavier lift than real estate. And so oftentimes people quit their jobs to go build a business. Well, real estate can be done in parallel. And then you are able to harvest these massive savings. And you've seen how these savings really stack up with bonus depreciation to be able to get you into a situation where you do have a huge amount of losses, and they're not real losses, right? They're depreciation losses. Like we mentioned earlier on, the property might be gaining in value. These may be completely not real losses at all, but you're being able to write them off.
Yeah, and a common question at this point is that, you've taken all this depreciation, isn't there something called depreciation recapture? Mm-hmm. And it's true, right? If you sell a property and you've taken all this depreciation, you do have to pay that back, and you pay it back in the form of a tax. And the tax is 25% of whatever you depreciated. That's going to be how much you have to pay when you sell that property.
And so, that's right now, right? That tax rate might change over time too.
That's right, yeah. And so the question is, is there anything you can do about that? Do you have to pay the tax every time? Well, one thing you can do is that you can be sure to always do something called a 1031 exchange, where when you sell the property, you take all those proceeds and put it into your next property, and you got to follow all the rules. But assuming you meet all the rules of the 1031, then you can defer both the capital gain, right? So the property appreciated in value, you get a capital gain, you're putting that gain into the next property, but also you can defer the depreciation recapture as well and not have to pay that tax. And so you kind of kick that can down the road is what a lot of people say, by keep scaling up. And the beautiful thing about scaling up, as I shared in that previous example, is that when you scale up, you start to create these massive losses. I did want to say that you can't double dip and claim depreciation twice on the same property. And so, or when you scale up, you can't claim the depreciation that you claimed on the previous property. So that is an important point. But as long as you're scaling up to a much bigger property, then you're not going to, that impact is not going to be as great. You're still going to have a significant amount of depreciation on that larger property that you buy.
Now, if you set this up right, you also can pass down your properties when you die to your children, and they get a step up in basis. So they get the value that properties are at that time is going to be counted for them. They're not going to have to pay back all those tax bills that you deferred all those years by 1031 exchanging. And so this is how you can create generational wealth, is you now have a certain property portfolio that you're handing off to your kids at your time of death that has a certain value, and they're not having to pay back all those taxes that you deferred all of those years. Why would the government set it up that way? Who knows exactly, but I guess they know that you're increasing the value of what you're adding. You're producing more income as you do this over time, and they simply have allowed you to be able to pass that on to your kids.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think one thing that maybe they assume is that they have time on their side, so they just assume that a future generation is going to eventually sell that property. And
they're going to get,
they're going to pay some taxes at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to address that we've been asked a number of times over the years, and maybe you're thinking that too right now, is would you ever take depreciation on a property if you knew that you were going to sell it, let's say 5 years later, and you were going to pay taxes and you weren't going to 1031? Is it still worth taking depreciation or bonus depreciation on that property? I would still say yes. And the reason for us that it's still worth it is because we, again, value every dollar in our pocket today, right? If you have those losses and you're able to shelter income today and you reinvest that money and it compounds, even if it's growing at 10% every single year, where you are in 7 years is you've doubled your money, right? And that was money you wouldn't have had if you paid taxes up front and you didn't take that bonus depreciation. So for me, knowing that we can reinvest our money and knowing every dollar we have today that we invest is going to grow in its value, I'd rather still take 100% bonus depreciation, even if I knew down the road I was not going to 1031 and I was going to have a tax bill. Also remember, when you're a high income earner, let's say you're making $500,000 a year, that $300,000 to $500,000, that amount is getting taxed at a really high rate, and it actually might be lower than the 25% rate. And the odds are very, very high that it's lower than the 25% rate. And so you might be switching from what you normally would have paid, let's say 37% on, to a 25% rate when you pay down the road. So it may actually be worth it. No, you're going to have to figure that out with your CPA. This is, again, another plug for having a great real estate savvy CPA who's able to think through strategy with you to make sure it's the right decision for you to be able to, let's say, claim real estate professional status, create these losses, front load them, and shelter your W-2 income, because you want to think about all of this thoughtfully and strategically. The goal is to minimize your tax bill over time and to be able to invest your money and grow your wealth. What we like to do in this community is fast fire, which is financial freedom as fast as possible, right? We want to get there in years, not decades. We want to get financially free in 3 years like we did, or 5 years. We don't want to be getting financially free when we're 65. We want to do it long before that. And oftentimes that means like, hey, let's do this aggressively up front so that we can be in a different situation 5 years from now, not needing to wait 25 years to retire.
One last thing I wanted to mention here is that we're not sure how long bonus depreciation is going to stay at 100%. What I can say is that the last time this happened, there was an expiration date on it, and actually 100% bonus depreciation was decreasing by 20% every year over the last several years before it came back to 100% last year. And now, as you mentioned earlier, it's permanent, but that can change with the next administration. And so there's a window of time here where it's still 100%, and it's still going to be 100% for the next several years. We're pretty sure about that, and that doesn't seem like it's going to change. So this is a window of time, right, where you can really take advantage of this, really lower your taxable income significantly in this window. And I remember the last time it took a little while for people to kind of recognize the benefit, but once they did, they really got into it.
I mean, that probably partially contributed and significantly contributed to the increase in values in real estate, like especially up to 2021. I mean, of course, we had low interest rates, but we were also encouraged to buy bigger and bigger and bigger properties and generate more and more, depreciation, that it really kept us all growing our real estate portfolios really aggressively and created a lot of buying.
Yeah, so the point being is that, you want to take advantage of this window. You want to kind of get in before prices really start to go up. This is the time to get in, and this is the time to learn how to buy real estate. Yeah,
and it's really right now a buyer's market more than ever. We don't know how long that's going to last. Last time it was a buyer's market, was back in the early, after the 2008 crash, right? We had some time there. So this is really an opportunity for all of you guys who maybe you've built portfolios, maybe you've sat on the sidelines for the last couple of years. It's the time to get back in. Maybe you're completely new to real estate and you're like, I don't know, interest rates. Like, this is the time to get in, okay? Because it is a buyer's market and it is 100% bonus depreciation. And so we started this whole podcast about how doctors use bonus depreciation to legally pay almost no taxes or no taxes. And so this is the time to be able to take advantage of that and to be in this situation. So why not jump in, learn real estate, and learn what you need to do to be able to do this and then go out and do it. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. If you want to go deeper and learn more about real estate investing and hear about some of the adventures we're on as well, make sure you join Investor Insights. It's our Semi-Retired MD newsletter. Put it out every single week. You can join by going to our website, semiretiredmd.com, and going to the section which is talking about our newsletter. And you'll get some treats in there from us with real estate tips and also, what's going on in our community. It's an amazing community to be part of, and we'd love to see you join us. We'll put the link below as well. We'll see you next time.